In today's class, let's understand the concept of REST-based web services. Okay, in yesterday's session, if you remember, there are two concepts that we discussed. Under web services, there are of two types. One is using SOAP, and the other one is REST, right? So in yesterday's concept, when we understood the concept of SOAP, SOAP is nothing but a protocol where the communication between the server and the client happens in the form of XML using SOAP request and SOAP response. Okay, so if you understand the concept clearly, what happens in the concept is, see here, very simple concept or simple logic. First, where is our BBC is our client. Okay, if you understand the concept of SOAP services, we already discussed that SOAP protocol we use, and the request and response happens in the form of SOAP request and SOAP response, right? Now see here, in yesterday's example we had a calculator where it can add and multiply. So when I say calculator dot add, okay, when I say calculator dot add, if I go into this method, this is my client that I am talking about. So it went to a class called iCalculator.java, which is present in this package, which is generated for us. Okay, I hope everyone remembers that we took a WSDL and we generated the classes, client-side classes, and then after generating the client-side classes, the next thing that we did is like we try to create objects and call them, right? So using SOAP, so later when you compare SOAP and REST, you will understand that calling a REST service is very easy when compared to SOAP. When I say calling, it's not calling, maybe consuming. Consuming a REST service is very easy when compared to SOAP. So if you consider the way the client needs to consume, first the client needs to take the URL, then generate Java classes, add those classes into his project, and once he adds those classes, he needs to create an object for that specific implementation class, then get the port type, and from there he needs to call the appropriate methods, right? Creating this object, then getting this port type, and then make an actual calls to the methods. This is the specific procedure that we follow in a SOAP service. And if you understand a SOAP service, when I say calculator.add, I'm just coming to this interface iCalculator, which is given by the client yesterday, and in that I'm calling this add method. So when I call this add method, I hope everyone remembers that yesterday I'm explaining the concept of at the rate action stuff, which is nothing but it calls this specific URL, which in turn calls a specific method called add with two arguments. Okay, argument 0 and argument 1. That is what we were discussing yesterday, right? So it means what happens at this scenario is whenever you call this add method, the request which is sent by you, what is the request that you are sending from demo.java? From demo.java, you are ideally creating an object and calling a method on top of that object. But in real time, what happens is after this, what happens is the object that you are sending will be converted into a SOAP request. Okay, the object that you are trying to send will be converted into SOAP request, and the SOAP request will travel over the network and will actually call this implementation class on the server. Okay, so whatever statements that I'm going to make here, just understand all these things. Let us assume that the client BBC is back in India and the server calculator web service provider is present in somewhere in USA. So now when the client is making a request onto this method add method, so what happens is this object, okay, contains some specific data 1 comma 9. That data and the object will be converted, means it will be converted into a SOAP request, and the SOAP request travels over the network, goes to the server, and on the server side the SOAP request will be again decoded back into an object, and the response will be calculated, and the response will be sent back. Then how will the response be sent back? Even though if you are returning back an object, the output response, which is an object, will be converted again back into a SOAP response, and the SOAP response will be sent over the network, and it reaches the client side. Once the SOAP response comes to the client side it converts again back into respect to objects, and it is showing you, or it is assigning the output back into a float variable, or it is just printing the output for you. Okay, so see here, this is a Java program. You cannot literally send this object over the network. Okay, so all you need to do is you try to create this object, and you try to convert this, not the object, actual data. The data which is coming here will be converted into a SOAP request, sent to the server calculates the output, and it sends it back in the form of a SOAP response that will be again converted back into appropriate type in the client side. So all these things happen internally because of some additional jars that we have added, like Jaxby jars and some marshalling and unmarshalling jars that we already have. So we need not worry about all this stuff. Is that clear to everyone, like what is happening in SOAP web services? Okay, good. Now let us try to understand the same old concept with respect to RESTful web services. Okay, so let me just start creating some, okay, or else let me explain the concept here. In a REST services, when I say REST stands for representational state transfer, okay, we will understand these REST services in a while. So there are a lot of technical terms, all these terms you will see, features of REST services. But coming to this REST web services, like what exactly is a RESTful web services? A REST web service is nothing but it is a style or an architecture. So REST plus web services is something considered as a RESTful web service. So what exactly is a RESTful web service and what it helps us to do? Now, WADL, okay, I will explain this in a while. See, the protocol. In general, whenever the client and the server talks with one another, okay, whenever the client and server talks with one another, the basic scenario that we understand here is it happens in the form of HTTP request and HTTP response, right? Now, REST uses the same old protocol, HTTP request and response. And REST is the most common interview question is like, what is the difference between a REST and SOAP? Okay, both are two different protocols. This is the most frequently asked question. If you understand the concept of SOAP, SOAP is a way of communication between the client and the server which happens only in the form of XML, which means XML is the only language with which the communication happens in the SOAP. So it uses a SOAP protocol which is completely in a in XML format. Now, the next concept. When I say REST, you might means SOAP only supports XML. Now coming to REST, you might have a question like, what exactly are the formats that a RESTful web service can support? So the answer to that is REST can support any format that the client and the server can understand one another. If suppose if the client says, hey, I can talk in English, if the server says I can also understand English, then we can use the RESTful web service for establishing communication between client and server in English. But ideally, that's not as simple as it looks. It needs some additional jars for converting the objects into English language and English language back into objects like that. It needs some additional jars. But if they are available, then the REST web service says that it can support any type of it can support any type of language that the client and the server can agree upon to talk. So the most famous things or most common things that we use across in a RESTful web service is like XML, JSON, and text. These are the most basic common ways of communication between the client and the server. Okay, so for now what I will do here is I will just start showing some examples. I will create an example and start showing like how a client and a browser can communicate in different ways or different formats. Okay, let's say file, new, other, dynamic web project, that's provider, say next, generate dot and say finish. Okay, created a simple project. Now to this project I will add certain features like the libraries, and here if you notice here, let me add those libraries and explain that. You see something called as Jersey, right? So where is the project? Let's provide in this project I go ahead and add the required libraries. So if you see here, apart from the regular jars like means Jackson and all, or the first thing, let's understand these jars like Jersey. Jersey jars are nothing but they are an implementation of RESTful web services. Why? Because in general, in interviews, people will ask you like, what is the implementation of RESTful web services that you have used, or what are the libraries that you have used for implementing RESTful web services? So the thing you can say is like Jersey is an implementation. Okay, Jersey framework. That is what we are trying to use or understand, or Jersey is generally considered as a library also for RESTful web services or for implementing RESTful web services. So once we add all the required jar files, let me add the web.xml also. See, the web.xml is again a straightforward configuration. In this configuration, see what I do here is, see, this init is not mandatory, but still if we want some specific type of mappings, we will do that. I will explain all this init, but the basic stuff. I did a URL pattern mapping like /start, which means like I accept any incoming URL pattern. Okay, I accept any incoming URL pattern. The next thing is the servlet name. When I say the servlet name as my REST servlet, then the my REST servlet is invoking a servlet container servlet, which is given by the Jersey framework. Okay, so Jersey is what we use for implementing RESTful web services in this scenario. So I hope these configurations are pretty clear and simple to everyone. Whenever this URL pattern comes, invoke this servlet. That is what I wrote. Okay, is that clear? Now, the next thing that I say here is, if I go back to any of my old projects, In my old projects, what I do, like in a Spring or a Struts, if a servlet or a controller is invoked, I tell the controller, hey controller, go ahead and read some config files so that the config files will tell you what exactly you need to perform, right? The same way, in order to tell this servlet container that, hey, go ahead and read something, what I do is I don't write any config files. I write an init param or an initialization parameter saying that com.sun.jersey.config property packages, which means what are all the packages you need to go ahead and scan. So I said, hey, read this package. That is the first configuration that I wrote here. So since we don't have the package, let me go ahead and create that package. So say new package. Okay. So once again, just reiterating the web.xml. Web.xml, it accepts any incoming URL pattern. If it comes, it invokes a servlet container servlet, which is given by the Jersey framework itself. And once this servlet is invoked, then the servlet will go ahead and read all the Java classes which are present under the package, which is configured at line number 13. Okay, is the web.xml configurations clear to everyone? Okay, yeah, that's good. So in this, basic concept is like invoking the classes directly. When I say invoking, or maybe you can say like just taking a look at or reading the classes directly without any config file and all that stuff here. Now just let me write a simple class called a demo. Okay, see here, and let me write a method called as public void say hello dot void public string. Let me return a string and I say return hello user, welcome to REST Web Services. So if anyone calls this method, I want to return this string. So now there are some configurations that I'm going to make here. By making those configurations, I'm going to call this method directly from the browser. REST is one of the most easiest concepts and one of the most powerful concepts. So see here, my intention is to make sure that call this method from the browser. Okay, so for that I'm trying to use one specific annotation here at the rate path. Okay, I just say at the rate path, and here Control Shift O to import that jaxs javax.wjs.rs. Okay, and in the path I'm just saying like slash hello. Okay, format. Now there is only one specific annotation that I wrote, like at the rate path and slash hello is what I wrote. Now let me go ahead and run my Java class. Run on server, finish. Okay, 1 second. Yes. I just removed some unnecessary projects. Now see here, if you understand the example, there are only two things that I did here. The first one, in the web.xml, I configured in such a way that if any URL pattern comes, invoke a Jersey servlet and tell the Jersey servlet to read a package. That is the first configuration that I made. And the second one that I wrote here is, okay, 1 second, servlet page. The resource config instance is not contained in resource classes. Okay, 1 second. It looks like now everything is good. It has started well. Okay, now see here. It hits the localhost 8080 and the web context. So it is not found. Why? Because we did not, excuse me, we did not configure anything like a welcome page or not. So this is good. But now there are only two files that I added. Like one is web.xml, which will go ahead and read this package whenever any URL pattern comes, and that is read by a servlet which is given by the Jersey framework. The next thing that I did here is wrote a class and a method called say hello, and all I did is like I told at the rate path one annotation that I'm using and said slash hello. This is what I did. Now just make here, look here, I say hello and I hit enter. Okay, so now the method not allowed. Okay, so to test that functionality, let me just add one more annotation here at the rate get control shift O to import it, which says that whenever you get a get request, whenever you receive a get request from the browser, call this say hello method. So let me check if it works. Let me take to the browser and hit it. See here, I'm not sure why this Eclipse stuff doesn't show this one, but that's fine. Okay, so did you notice here what happened? I'm just using a simple URL and I am able to hit a method on the server side. So the REST web services, in a REST web services, the basic concept that you need to understand here is for retrieving any information from the server or for sending any information onto the server, we use the URLs and appropriate URLs, and everything and anything is considered here as a resource. Okay, so in REST web services, all we deal with is URLs and resources. If I hit this URL called hello on the server, it will fetch some information for me. If I hit some other URL, it will fetch a different information for me. So that is what you need to understand. So the basic configuration is like say hello and I said get here and I'm able to call this method. Is this basic configuration clear to everyone? This is the first basic step in REST services. Everyone. Okay. Now, that's good. Now, the second thing. In this scenario, what I will be explaining here is how I can call different types of methods in REST services or using these URLs. And the next thing that you need to understand here is I'm saying hello, and the browser by default sends a get request. So when I sending a get request, the say hello method is being called. Now let me write one more thing. Control C. Say good night. Okay, I want to call that method post. Control Shift O. Import that post and return good night user. Uh, Welcome to REST web services. Now the first thing that you need to understand here is from a browser, by default, if you hit like this, we will be sending a get request. Okay, now how can I send a post request from this browser? For that, the next scenario that we understand here is everyone, like if you're using, I'm by default I'm using Chrome browser, and whatever tool or a plugin that I'm going to tell here is available across, like I guess like it's available for Mozilla also and for different browsers. So what you can do is like you can go ahead and search for something called as advanced REST client. Okay, advanced REST client, you can search like this, and if it is for Chrome, it shows this like HTTPS Chrome, like a Chrome store, like an Apple store, it has a Chrome store. So in this, if you click on this one, it takes you to the Chrome store where it opens up a pop-up and asks you for installation. In my scenario, since I have already installed, it says launch app, but if you are doing it for the first time, it will say install is just like a matter of seconds. Maybe it would be done in 10-15 seconds. Once you do this, you can click on this launch app, or on your Chrome browser on the left hand side here, it will show like anytime you open a browser here, it shows something called as apps which you have installed on your browser. If you click on that apps, it will show you something called advanced REST client which you have already installed. Okay, so select this one like advanced REST client. This will open up a plugin in your browser, and this is what we use for testing REST web services. Okay, if you want to test SOAP services, yesterday we thought that we understood that we need to download a SOAP UI client and test it, right? But if it is for a REST services, what we do is like we open it in a browser and send the request and all that stuff in this browser, test it in this browser. So the first what I will do is like let me test the same old scenario, like the same old URL. So I go to this advanced REST client. In this URL I will paste my in this section I will paste my URL, localhost 8080 REST provider hello, and the next step that I do is I am sending a get request. So I can select these radio buttons and can send any type of request, get, post, put, delete, or anything. So right now I'm sending a get request. So now what I do here is I'll just say send. Okay, so there is a lot of information which will be displayed here. I will explain everything one by one, but the first thing that I want you to look here is the status 200. When I say the status 200 okay, it means everything is good. So do you remember, team, like when we initially started with the concept of servlets, we understood the concept of HTTP request and response, where in the response we understood that we get a status code back. So what is the status code? Status code is nothing but something which the server is sending back so that the browser can understand whether it is a successful scenario, or means there are different types of statuses, out of which 200 okay is like a successful response. Okay, and if you see the output here, hello user, welcome to REST web services. So this is how in general we test our REST web services. Now, the second scenario that I'm going to explain here is the URL remains the same, but instead of sending a GET request, I'm trying to send a POST request. Okay, I'm trying to send a POST request. So I select POST and say send. Now, if you go back and notice on a post, I call my goodnight method. So all I do is like the output I get is like, okay, the output I get is like goodnight user. So I go ahead, I use the same old URL pattern like hello, say request is post and say send. Notice here the output is goodnight user, welcome to REST web services. So which means based on the type of URL you are sending and the request, we are able to call some appropriate methods on the server side. Clear till this point? Okay, good. Now the next scenario that I can say here is, let us assume that I want to, let me write one more method here. Good night to all. Okay, good night everyone. Some message. So I want to call this method. How can I call this method? So to call this method again, I will be doing one more way. Okay, so what I do here is I say at the rate path and say here slash all. Okay, I write all or anything, ABC or whatever. So in this context, what happens is, if I want to call say hello method, I need to pass hello as the URL pattern and the request type is get. If I want to call say goodnight, I need to send hello as the URL pattern and the type of request is post. But if I want to call say goodnight to all, I need to send slash hello slash all. That is the URL pattern that I need to send, and the method type is post. Okay, now see here, I go back to my browser and I say slash hello slash all. That is what I say. So what happens is, localhost comes to the server 8080, it comes to my exact Tomcat server which is running, and REST provider, it calls the application. Okay, it calls the application like this REST provider application. Then the next thing, it goes as hello. Once it goes, once this hello is read, then the Jersey service looks for a path called hello. Then if I have multiple classes, same old scenario, let me explain here one more thing. Not really. So if I have a class called test, and if it has something like import. So the scenario here I'm trying to explain here is there are two classes, demo.java and test.java. So when will test.java be called? Whenever someone sends a URL pattern called ABC. When will demo.java be called? Whenever someone sends hello as URL pattern. So what is the incoming URL pattern? Hello is the incoming URL pattern followed by slash all. So since we are calling hello, the demo.java will be called, and after that, since I am sending all, this is the method that will be called. Okay, so see here, I say send. Now see here, good night everyone. Did you notice that is what is nothing but the good night everyone method which is present. Now means say good night to all method that is being called. Okay, is it clear to everyone like how you can use different URL patterns to call different methods on the server side? Okay, as simple as that. So using REST services is nothing but the basic scenario is forming or framing a URL and calling a resource on the server side. Okay. Now the next scenario that I explain here is for if I say slash all and if I say post, this method will be called. Everyone knows that. Now let me make some changes here. I go back to my browser and say that I keep the URL same, but I make the request as get. Now, question to everyone: is there any method which can be called when this specific URL with get request is sent? As simple as that. The answer is no. There is nothing like that which can handle those things. So when I say send, did you notice here the status is not 200 for me. The status is 405. Method not allowed. Why? Because it says, hey, you are sending a valid pattern slash hello slash all. That is a valid pattern that can be taken onto the server. But there is no method which can handle that URL which is of type get. Okay, that is not present. So now, so that is the reason why it shows some errors and the status is 405 method not allowed. Now I say ALLL, that is what I say. Now can anyone tell me what will be the status of the error message, or what will the error message look like? Any guess? Very simple. The hint. No, it's not same. Yeah, exactly. Very good. See here. The more, as I said, like very simple and not found. See here. When I say all, ALLL, then it says 404, not found. Do you remember, like anytime when you try to search something on your on some website, and if you type in a wrong URL, the wrong URL will cause 404 page not found for you, right? Which means at any point of time, if you are trying to request something from the server which is not present on the server, then that is categorized as 404 not found, which means it is something which the server cannot handle or server cannot find. So it can find hello, and if it goes to demo.java, it cannot find ALLL, so it returns back 404 for you. So if you understand the status till now, means it's a kind of, there are different types of statuses that we are going to see going ahead. But if you see that, so why did it throw 405 again? Yeah, let me explain that once again. So first, hello. So in the scenario when it was throwing 405, let us understand the scenario. The URL pattern that I am sending is hello and all, and I am sending a get request. Now, hello. Can it see hello? Yes, it can see hello. Can it see all? Yes, it can see all. Is that a post method? No, it is not a post method. It is a get method. Okay, sorry. We are sending a get method, but this is a post method. So it says that specific type is not allowed on the server. That is what it says. But if I say a completely new URL which can never be handled by the server or which the server will never understand, then that is what it shows for 404. Okay, so each and everything is uh, means documented in a much detailed way, like different types of errors. The status codes start from 1xx 100 and it goes till 599. Okay, but not everything is in use, and REST status codes. If you see here, these are all the valid status codes, and anything which starts with 1xx is something called as an informative messages. If the browser gets 100, it says some continue, and 101 switch protocols, 102 it is means like processing some request. And if it gets anything in the series of 2xx, like 200 means okay, 201 means created, 202 means accepted, which means like if suppose if from a browser you are trying to create a user and say something like submit. Once you submit, let us assume that the data is sent onto the server and the server creates that resource and saves it in your database or whatever. In that scenario, you will send back 201, a much more meaningful status, which says that hey, the resource that you had sent is created in the database or whatever. So anything which starts with the 2 till 2xx, these are all considered as success messages. Anything which starts with 3, they are considered as redirect operations. So redirect operations are something like when you want to send a redirect to a different page and all those scenarios, you use this 3xx. And when you say 4xx, they are basically client side mistakes. So do you see 404, which is like not found, which means if suppose if I'm trying to access some resource which is not present on the server, then it says 404. 401 means unauthorized. You can always set some security restrictions saying that hey, I am a regular user and I'm trying to access some admin page. So you can throw back, you are a regular user, you cannot access that URL, so you are unauthorized, like that. So 400 bad requests, we will see 400, 403, these things. 405 is what we saw, method not allowed. So these are the things which are caused because of client-side errors, and 5xx because of some server errors. The most common thing that you see here is 500 internal server error. Okay, so these are the common error messages that you need to understand, like why a browser is receiving those specific URLs, sorry, specific status codes, because each and everything has a specific meaning. If anything which starts with 4, it means that is your mistake. If anything which starts with 5, it means it's problem with the server, like that. Okay, so that's one scenario. Now going back to the next level. So in this context, we understood like how I can call different methods based on different URLs. Okay, so I'm not going to explain that once again, means more, but maybe let me just modify this and say that if I want to call this slash all slash a slash b slash c, which means if a URL called hello slash all slash a slash b slash c, if that URL comes, then this method will be called. So you can frame URLs as an means in any format you like, but framing the URLs has a specific meaning to it, like how you want to form it has a specific meaning, which means like again, like a meaningful URL patterns that you need to create. We will see that in a while. Okay. Now, the next scenario that I will explain here is how exactly you can use or you can send a dynamic message onto the server so that the server can receive the dynamic message and can give it to a method. Okay. So let us assume that you want to say hello to a user, say hello to user, and means let it be get or post. I'm not worried about get or post, but my intention is to explain how you can send dynamic data. Okay. So what I say here is the URL pattern is @path, and notice very carefully what exactly I'm trying to write here. Like, see, I just wrote at line number 21 something called as an all. So hello slash all, if it comes, then say good night to all will be called. The same way at line number 28 I will slightly tweak the way I'm writing the line number 21 syntax. Okay, instead of writing just all or whatever, I just write something as brackets, and here I will say something like dv, like a dynamic value or anything, any random name you can use. But for a more meaningful scenario, people use something called as param, which stands for a parameter. Okay, so when I write something in brackets, see here in brackets, it means I want to represent something which is dynamic. Okay, so here all I do here is, in this context, when I say hello to user, I want to read this value which is coming dynamically and want to use it in this method. See, again for that, if you go back to your old concept of uh, servlets or whatever, you have ways of retrieving that from, means if you enter something in the text box or blah blah whatever, you have ways to retrieve it. The same way, to retrieve this one and store it into a string, there is again an annotation which is given for you, a simple annotation @path param. Okay, @path param. And also the next thing, when you are trying to import, just make sure that you always import for this Jersey framework java x.wjs.rs. Okay, import from these stuff, from those packages. So @path param, and the next naming convention that I give here is important. In brackets I give the same exact name that I write here, param param. If I write there dv, in this double quotes after path param you need to write dv. Okay, anything. So I write the exact name and I say here string user name. Okay, so what I do here is control C, hello plus username. Okay, now see here, what is that I did at line number 29? At line number 29 I told that the value whatever which is coming here is dynamic. That is what I told. Then the next scenario that I told here is, hey, if I get a dynamic value there, take the dynamic value which is coming in the path parameter and insert it into this username. This is what the annotation @path param will do for you. Okay, and don't ever confuse that this param and this param are something to do with it. Since it's a meaningful name, people call it as param like that. If not, if I say parameter, control C, exactly the same thing here, parameter. Now let me go ahead and execute this and send a dynamic value called Raghu. If I send Raghu, it says hello Raghu, welcome to REST web services. See here, I go back to my browser, I go back to my REST client, and I say here hello slash Raghu, and it is a get request. Okay, so it is a get request that I am sending. So I say send the status is 200, everything is good. It shows hello Raghu, welcome to REST web services. Now the same thing in the URL, I say like hello slash Naveen, and I go ahead and say send. Did you notice here? Hello Naveen, welcome to REST web services. This is what it shows. So is it clear to everyone like how you can pass dynamic values, retrieve those dynamic values and use it in your methods? Everyone? Okay, good. So like what we understood is like how to use the URL patterns to call methods on the server side. That is what we understood. Now the next concept that we will understand here is like what are the different types of requests that we can send. Okay, so if you understand this concept of uh, REST services, the REST internally uses the HTTP protocol itself. Okay, REST doesn't have anything specific like SOAP. Okay, SOAP has its own protocol and all, but in REST we use a plain old HTTP request and response. So when you talk of a HTTP request and response, what are the different types of methods in general we use in this HTTP request and response? The most common methods that we use in this request and response in a HTTP is nothing but get, post, put and delete. These are the four methods that we use in HTTP. So if I say get, post, put and delete, then my next question, in which scenario you use get, in which scenario you use post, put and delete? Is there a specific convention saying that, hey, in these type of scenarios you need to use get, in different types of scenarios you need to use put, post and all? The answer is yes. So let's try to understand the scenarios. Now, if I say or if I try to reconnect all the methods in simple database type operations that I can say, anything I say get is nothing but I want to retrieve some information from the server. Okay, so uh, and also the concept behind REST is it is like getting a resource or sharing a resource from the server. So when I say getting or sharing a resource, the basic concept is what is a resource for you? A resource is anything that is sitting on the server that you can retrieve, like some details of a student or some string or employee details, address details or whatever, anything. Now, the next concept here is, let us assume that I want to retrieve some details from the database. I use a get operation. Next, let us assume that I want to create some resource on the server. When I say create, the same old scenario. In a scenario where if I'm trying to register in a website, saying that I want to register myself, so I will send all the details onto the server where the server creates a record for me and it will say that, hey, your ID is successfully created, you can log in. So that is a scenario where I say post or I use a post operation, and put means an update. Let us assume that I have already registered in my website and I want to update my phone number or I want to update my address details or anything. In that scenario, I use or I call a put method. Okay, I call a put method. Then if I want to delete a specific records or something, then I use a delete operation. So each and every method that we are trying to use here has a specific functionality. Get, put, post and delete. Get is for read, post is for create, put is for update and delete is for delete. And the most important concept here is get, put and delete are idempotent. When I say idempotent, it means the state of a resource will not change after the initial request, which means let us assume that I want to retrieve some resource. Okay, I want to retrieve a resource called a student with an employee, a student with a student ID 1. So initially when I say get that record, I will retrieve that, the resource will be retrieved for me, and every time I click on the get button, I get the same results again, right? Which means the state is not changing. Now if I take an update operation, let us assume that my phone number on a website is 1234. I want to update my phone number from 1234 to 3456. So initially I enter 3456 and click on update. So what will happen? The state of the phone number will change in the backend to 3456. And again, if you keep on clicking update, nothing else will happen. Why? Because it is the same thing that you're trying to update there, 3456, 3456, 3456 every time, which means the state of the object will not change after the first subsequent request. So the same way with delete. If I say like I am going to delete a record like number 5, if I keep on pressing 555 every time, for the first time the record gets deleted, and from the next time onwards nothing else will happen. So get and put and delete are considered as idempotent. The state of the object will not change after the initial request. But post, you need to be extra careful. It is something which is not idempotent, which means let us assume that you go ahead and say you click on register for the first time. Once you click on register button, what will happen? The register button will register you in the website, and it might create you a unique ID. And if suppose if there is no unique check saying that the login ID or anything, if there is no unique check, what will happen? Again, if you click on register, it will again register, which means it will again create a new ID for you. Again, if you click on register, it creates a new primary key ID again, which means every time you make a new request to create that resource, the resource will be created on the database, which means every time for that resource, the primary key or whatever key that is associated with it will change. So for every subsequent request on a post, the state of the object changes. So post is not idempotent. Understanding this concept is very important. Why? Because difference between post and put is the most frequently asked interview question which many people fail to answer. So post is something which will change the state of the object every time, but put will not change the state. Is that clear, or you want me to explain once again? Okay, very good. So the concepts are like in which scenario which one to use. Means it is means a simple scenario that I can say is in every time you can use get, or every time you can say post. Means even though for create, read, update, delete you can say post every time, that doesn't matter, but they are not good coding standards. If you want to follow good coding standards, always go ahead and use appropriate methods whenever they need to be used. Okay. Okay, now the next scenario that we will look here is like we try to understand like how we can call the basic set of applications, or sorry, basic set of methods if I have, and also we understood like how to call different methods if I have something like a get or a post, and also we understood how we can send you different URL patterns and invoke different methods. We saw that, and also the last combination that we saw is like how I can send dynamic values and how I can retrieve those dynamic values. The next scenario, if suppose, means again this is like an extension that I told for line number 22. Okay, so if suppose if I am trying to get multiple dynamic values, I can say here a, this is one dynamic value, slash b, one dynamic value that I can retrieve here, saying that comma at the rate path param, I can say a, and I want to put it into string password or whatever like this. You can add you can retrieve comma, you can add for b also the dynamic value. So based on different types of inputs that you are that you are receiving, you can always configure your methods with appropriate URL patterns and the input arguments. Okay, that is the scenario. Now the next one that we will be looking here is a little more advanced. So when I say a little more advanced, it is like how we can deal with objects. Okay, so this is the best example of retrieving a resource from the server. That is what I can say, whatever example that we are going to see here. So for that, what I will do here is I will show a simple example of something called as a student. We created two parameters, ID and student name, and say source, generate getters and setters, control shift F, formatted. Okay, created a student.java, and then the next scenario that I will explain here is, let me annotate this student.java class with a simple annotation called @XML root element. I will explain this why I'm trying to annotate this. Okay, so it's @XML root element. Okay, now once this is done, the next step that I do here is like create one more class called student demo. Okay, now in student demo I say like I annotate with @path. Okay, I say @path, control shift O, import the, and say slash student. Okay, I use a URL pattern called student, and then we'll write a specific method which will go ahead and fetch me the basic set of student details. Okay, so now I say public student get student details, and let me say int id. Okay, not int id. Let me write this method, you will get some understanding. And let me path slash id, and here I say like path param id, then I say int stdid, control shift O, import the get, and here I say the first thing is 1 second, so student, very simple logic. If stdid is equal to 1, what will I do? If stdid equal to 2, I will do something else. else I will do something. Student std equal to null. If this is the case, let me make one more change here. Let me add constructor. So generate constructor using the, okay, done. And now come to student.java. If student id equal to 1, return std equal to new student of 1 comma 2, return std equal to new student of. I'm just building some raw data here. If not, we can always go to the database and fetch these kind of informations. I'm sending back std here. Okay, so what is this basic method doing? The method can be called when I send a URL pattern called student, and it says like it is taking a dynamic value which is in the form of an ID and give it to this std ID. Now I'm just checking if the student ID equal to 1, then I will return this object. If not, I will return this object. If in real time, what we will do is like once you need some student details, you take the ID, send the ID to the database, and in the database you will make a query saying that select star from, or select star from student table where student ID equal to the dynamic value that you get. You pass it and retrieve the record and show it back to the user, right? The same thing, like I'm trying to build the dynamic data here, and now let me call this method from the server, sorry, from the browser. So what I do here is I say slash student, that will call my class which is nothing but a student demo class, and I say slash 1, and it is a get request. Okay, so the request is get, should be good. I go ahead and say send. 404 not found student provider. Let me just rebuild this once again. So it's loaded. Let me go back to the browser, and the same old URL, I go ahead and say send. Okay, it shows 500. Yeah, I will explain that once again. Student does not have a no arg default constructor. Okay, context is reloaded. Okay, you got the response here. Okay, I will explain all these things step by step, what is happening and all. So the first scenario, understand the URL pattern. The URL pattern, I'm not interested in explaining the initial part of the stuff which is highlighted, and I'm just explaining the second part. So I say student. As and when I say student, it comes to this class called student demo. So this class is invoked because of this URL pattern. And then there is something called as a one, which I wrote here, because of which this path is identified and it takes in the dynamic value. So understand here, when I write something in brackets, it means that is a dynamic value that is coming. So I say the ID. See, I can write the name anything here. Okay, XYZ also I can write here. So I write here XYZ and I write the exact name XYZ here. Okay, so whenever a value, dynamic value comes, that will be associated with XYZ, and if I use this pattern called @path param XYZ int stdid, what will happen is this XYZ which is present in the path param, which contains value 1 in our scenario, will be replaced to this stdid, or stdid will get the value which I'm trying to pass here dynamically. Is that clear, Sai? Okay. So the next concept, what I do here is I will say 2 instead of 1. I say 2. I say send. So if student demo extends to another class, sorry, I did not get you. If student demo extends to another class, then what will happen? Means what is your question size, to be specific? See, if I understand the question correctly, I can say something like this. Even if your class demo or student demo, even if it is extending some other class, it extends some other ABC class or BBC class, that's fine, that's okay. But still, as long as the URL pattern matches here called student, this is the class, or this is the one which will be called for you. And if this matches a dynamic value here, this is the method that will be called for you. Okay. And also the next scenario here is like whenever I say 2, it fetches the data, the status is 200, which is okay. And if you see here, it shows an XML representation of the data. So student ID 2, student name Naveen. So it shows by default an XML representation to Naveen. And if I say 1, it sends 1 Raghu student name. And if I say something as apart from 1 and 2, if I say 3, 3 is something which we are not handling, so we don't have a resource. So if that is the scenario, it shows like response does not contain any data. And if I go back to my HTTP status codes, do you see here something called as 204, which means no content found. So I'm trying to request for some content, but the content is not actually present on the server. So there are multiple scenarios to do this. Either you can set some custom messages, or you can always go back and associate them with some specific messages. So in our scenario, if you notice, it shows like everything is good, but the content is not found. So we are getting an empty data from the server. So that is what you can do. Or in general, the scenarios like this, if suppose if I am trying to search for some resource which is not present on our system, in general we send back 404. Okay, resource not found kind of scenario. So the next concept here that I will explain is, if suppose the browser, means the power of REST web services is REST can handle different types of data. When I say different types of data, the data can be in XML format or the data can be in a JSON format. JSON stands for JSON, stands for JavaScript Object Notation. So that is again one very important concept that you need to go ahead and learn. Okay, but if you see JSON, I hope JSON is here. So JSON is very simple and straightforward. So if you see, yesterday we saw how to correlate a simple object in an XML format, right? The same way, if you want to understand the format for a book, see, book is an object if you consider or if you compare it with Java, and it has an ID 01, language Java, edition third edition, author Herbert Shield. Okay, so this is a JSON representation. JSON is something which has key value pairs, and the key is nothing but the property, and the value is nothing but the actual value that the property is holding, and they both are separated by a colon symbol. Okay, so JSON is lightweight, and all the browsers, most of the browsers can understand JSON, and it is very easy to parse. When I say parse, reading a JSON is very easy when compared to XML. So JSON is one thing which is becoming very famous nowadays. And in most of the companies, like if you see someone implementing a RESTful web services, they try to deal the incoming and outgoing data in the form of JSON request. Not a JSON request, means the data will be in the form of JSON. Okay, so anytime you send a request, the data will be in JSON, and anytime you try to retrieve the request, the data will again be in the form of JSON. Okay, which means it will be in this format. Now in our example, if you see here, if I send something called as a 2 and try to submit the request, it shows the value is like the output is in the form of an XML, the student ID, student name, and all those things, blah blah blah. Let me make some changes here and go to the next level of this explanation. Let me remove this @XML root element. I remove this. Okay, let the context get reloaded, and I try to send the same old request. So if I send the request, it shows like 500 internal server error, something it shows for us. And if I go back to my console and see here, it displays some error message saying that a message body writer for Java class student and Java type class like com easy learn REST web service student and mime type media application often stream was not found, blah blah blah, all these issues, right? So the basic meaning of this is, understand the concept. It is very easy and straightforward. How will Java class deal with student? So whenever you say student, any class in Java will understand it as object, right? See, all the things that are shown here like student std, all those things are considered as objects in Java. But on a browser, the browser can never ever understand an object. Browser can always understand a format like XML or JSON, right? Now, in this context, what needs to happen, or what will the Jersey framework do is, the Jersey framework will convert your object. See, what is this method returning back? The method is returning back a student object. Now, can a browser understand a student object directly? The answer is no. So, what exactly the Jersey framework will do is, the Jersey framework because of all the dependent libraries that we have added, because of the libraries that we have added. So what it does is it tries to convert, okay, it tries to convert the actual object called student into an XML format. And if from the browser, okay, first let us understand only one simple way. So when I call this, the method is returning back an object. So what will Jersey framework do? It will convert the object into an XML format and will give it to you. Now, to convert it into an XML format, there is a simple notation that you need to write here. On the student class, you need to say XML root element, which means, hey, this is the parent element in an XML. That is what you need to write, and it is considered under Java X.xml binding. So after this, I will explain a concept of marshalling and unmarshalling. Marshalling and unmarshalling means converting an XML to object and object to XML, which is automatically taken care if we add a specific set of jars. Okay, jars we marshalers and unmarshalers, that is what we call. And for that, all you need to tell is what is the basic root element. If you say that student is the root element, what happens is whenever you get back a response, okay, whenever you get an output, see here, whenever you get an output, the student is nothing but the actual XML root element that it is considering and building up this object, and ID is nothing but the property, and the student name is nothing but again one more property. So by adding just one annotation called @XML root element and adding the required jars, the Jersey framework will take care of converting your object into an XML. Why? Because a browser can understand XML. And the same way, if you are sending XML from the browser sends an XML, and that XML needs to be converted into an object on the Java side. That is again taken care for you because of the jars and @XML root element tag that you write here. Okay, clear with that? Simple scenario is the method returns an object. A browser cannot understand an object. Then that is the reason why the object will be converted into an XML representation by the framework. So for converting that XML representation, you need to add a specific binding tag called @XML root element, which will help you in doing all this stuff. Clear till this point? Okay, awesome. Very good. Now the next concept that I say here is like XYZ mapping. This is all done. The next level of concept that I'm going to explain here is, if suppose if my browser, see, for now you understood that whatever data that you are getting back is in the form of XML. Now let us assume that I want to get back a different type of data. Okay, I want to get back a different type of data. When I say different type, in a format called JSON, that is what I want to get. So what I can do is, when the browser is sending a request, okay, when the browser is sending a request, see here, understand what I'm trying to say. I just clicked on this form. Okay, in this form, under add new header, I type in something called as uh, accept. Okay, so accept, here I say application slash JSON. So it means accept. What exactly this will do is, this explains that, hey, what exactly the end client is expecting as output. So my end client, this is my end client. Okay, so this end client is expecting a JSON now. Okay, in the previous scenarios I did not add this accept, so by default it is displaying me XML. But right now I am saying that, hey, I don't need XML, I need JSON. So I go ahead and click on send. Did you notice here, instead of displaying the data in an XML format, it shows a JSON representation of the same old data ID, which is 2, and the student name is Naveen. The same thing if I say here as 1 and say send, ID is 1 and the student name is Raghu. And just notice here what I am trying to show here, the request headers. Okay, in the request header, if you notice, what is that I am trying to send in the request header, which means request headers means whenever we are sending a HTTP request onto the server, what exactly we are sending in that HTTP request. Okay, I say the request headers are like user, sorry, this accept. The accept is nothing but application slash JSON, which means the browser is telling the server, hey server, I need a JSON back. So don't send the response in whatever way you want. Send me output in the form of JSON. That is what the accept header is doing here. Okay. So now if I change this accept from JSON back to XML and say send, notice here the request header is saying that I will accept an XML back. That is what this shows. And in this XML, all I say here is student ID, student name, and student, which means I get back a response in the form of XML. So whenever the client is sending a request, the client can tell in which way or what is the type of output it is expecting. So REST can support different types of outputs. So the same method, see, the same method called get student details can help you in returning back different types of data. Let us assume that this method is being called by 10 different clients, out of which some clients might say like, hey, 5 clients might say that, hey, I need data in the form of XML. Then we can tell the end all those 5 clients saying that, hey, tell or put the accept type as XML. Some 5 more clients, they might say that we need in JSON. So we will tell that, hey, when you are sending a request, send what type of data that you want, in which is nothing but set this accept and to JSON, so that on the server I can understand you need JSON. So the framework, when it returns a student, it can automatically convert to whatever type of data you want. Okay, so tomorrow again, if you introduce or if you invent a new language called ABC, and if you say like, hey, my browser is expecting data in the form of ABC, send the accept as ABC, and in your class path add the jars which can convert a Java object to ABC language and ABC language back into Java object. If you can add those jars, you can simply straight away use REST web services. Okay, but you can never do this in SOAP services. SOAP is only a standard way of communication using XML only. Okay, it can only support XML. It will never support any other type of protocol there. Okay, so that is one of the biggest advantages of using REST services over SOAP. And the next thing here is like, the first thing that we saw here is like how to call this method with a dynamic value. And there is one more thing that I'm going to explain here, which will tell like one more annotation, at the rate produces. Okay, this produces will actually tell me like what are all the different types of outputs my method can generate. So here I say media type dot application underscore JSON comma. Okay, let me do one thing. So I wrote here saying that my method actually produces a JSON output. That is what I have written here. Now the client says that, hey, give me a JSON output. Then when I say send, it says one Raghu, everything is good. Now some other client says that I need XML. Okay, so now if I go ahead and say send, do you see here it shows 406 not acceptable? Why? Because right now I had just annotated my method saying that my method can only produce JSON. That is only thing that I can provide. I cannot provide anything apart from this. So now if someone else comes and says that a new client, you sell your product to a new client and the new client says that, hey, we need the same feature but in the form of XML. So all the URL, everything remains the same. All you do is you try to add one more media type here, underscore XML. This is what you say. So once you add this media type, it means that this method can now create two types of outputs, either JSON or XML. Anything should be good. Now in the same scenario, if I go ahead and say send, it will not show this 406. Why? Because the current method can also handle XML requests. See here, it sends XML also. So anything, now it can accept, it can get JSON or XML, anything for you. Why? Because it produces both. Okay, that's the scenario. Now the next concept, there might be some no need define XML root element in student class. Okay, that's what I'm trying to say. Whenever you are trying to deal with XML, your class and the framework needs to understand what is the root element. So at the rate XML root element is mandatory. If again, if I go back and remove this, okay, when it tries to generate this XML format content, it cannot identify like what is the root element and how it needs to generate this data. It cannot understand and it cannot produce it. So XML root element is mandatory. Is that clear? Okay. Now the next scenario. Let us understand. Let us assume that from the browser you want to send some data. Okay. Okay. So see here. Yeah. The answer is yes. So here I am producing an XML. So if I want to convert my student into XML, okay, my method supports XML. So what I do, again I go to student class and I will take this reference. But if I don't have this, even though my method is capable of generating XML, the output cannot be generated. Why? Because the XML, it shows at this point saying that again the same old error. It shows like it cannot find the actual root element for conversion. Okay, so that's the problem. So now the next example that I show here is like how exactly you can send data from the browser onto the server. So when I say send the data, the first thing that you notice here is like using @path, we are able to send like dynamic value XYZ. We are able to send some ID, blah 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 stuff and all. But I'm not interested in sending this dynamic data. Rather, I want to send some dynamic data like an object onto the server so that the server can understand this value and can get me back the output. Okay, so how can I do that? In this context, what I will explain is I will send what I can say, an object from the browser. It is not an object actually, it is an XML that I send from the browser, and that XML will be converted into an object automatically on the server side, and it will be, again if we want, again we can send it back. Okay, so let me write a simple method here. Public student change student format student std. Okay, so what I do here is I will not make any, I will not do anything, just return the student whatever I get from the browser back to the browser again. But what I will do here is I will try to say, like, if I get an XML, I can convert it into JSON or JSON to XML, something like that I will show here. So I say at the rate post and at the rate produces, this is common. And write one more thing. See here. Let me make some changes here. Control Shift O. Now I wrote a new annotation called consumes. When I say consumes, it means I am willing to read some data, or I am willing to take in some data as input. That is what I am trying to say. So I will show you a simple example which might be clear for you. So it is just a post request that I need to send here. So the first one, save this file, go back to my browser and change it to post. Okay, let's say get. I'll explain it 1 second. Let me get some dummy data here. Again, this is student details. Control C. Now the URL that I need to send here to invoke my new method is nothing but a student, and it is a post request. Okay, so I say that it is student and the request is post. And do you see here something called as a payload? So what exactly is a payload? If you remember, when we want to send some data from the browser onto the server, we can send the data securely. In securely means, instead of displaying the entire data in a URL, we can send it using a post method in the payload. That is what I told initially, if you remember, during the servlets concept, right? So I want to send some data from the browser. So let us assume that I want to send this data, student to ID, student name, and again the student close, okay, the tag. So now what I am trying to do here is I want to send some data onto the server. If I want, I can always do like a save, update, create, delete, or whatever. So once I send the data, I want to retrieve the data back and see it in a different format. Okay, so let me add a new header, and here I say the content type. Okay, the content type, I say application slash XML, and the accept is JSON. So here, understand, what it is. Okay, so if you see this, if you understand this, okay, let me just add the content type application slash XML. And if you notice the scenario here, the first one, the content type. The content type tells what kind of data the browser is sending onto the server. I'm saying that, hey, the browser is sending an XML data to the server. That is what I'm telling. So this is an XML data. Then the accept is nothing but what exactly the server, sorry, the browser is expecting back. the browser expects back the output in the form of a JSON. So the two headers, accept and content type, are the content type is what you are sending from the browser, and accept is what you are expecting from the server. Okay. Now, if I say this send, did you notice here what did I do? Means in my method I did not do anything specific, but if you want me to, if you want me to change something like std dot set student name has changed. Okay, so if I go back and send the same request again, see what is the request that I'm sending? One and Raghu. In my previous example, previous scenario, I get back the same response back, one and Raghu. I did not make any changes. Let us assume that I'm making some changes on the server side and I click on send. Did you notice here? One and Raghu is what I send onto the server in the form of an XML, and one and changed is what I retrieve or get back from the server. So understand the scenario. The very simple and basic concept. What are you sending from the browser? We are sending an XML. Now, will your Java program understand XML? The answer is no. The Java program cannot understand XML. Now, how exactly this method can get that value that you are entering in the browser? So if I can debug this, is it in debug mode? No, debug the server startup. Okay. Now if I hit the same application again, send, see, the request came to the server. On the server, if I hover my mouse on STD, it shows ID as 1 and the student name as Raghu. And at line number 36, I am changing the student name from Raghu to changed. And if I hover my mouse again, it says 1 and it changed. But my first question, how exactly the XML is being mapped into this XTD? See, all those things are taken care for you internally because of the charts and the Jersey framework. And at line number 32, you are saying, hey, my method can only accept input elements either of type JSON or XML. That is what you told. Anything apart from this, if you send, your method cannot handle. That is the first scenario. Next scenario, once you say these are the two things it can handle, and if you send an XML, in this context you are sending an XML. If you send an XML, the framework is converting that XML into an object and will feed that as an input to this STD. Next scenario, once you say or you do some lot of configurations or changes or whatever you want to do, you perform all your business logics, and finally, if you are trying to return back the student object back, you are returning an object, and this object you are trying to return back onto the browser. But what exactly the browser is telling? Hey, I can only get, or I can only, or I need only JSON. That is what the browser is telling. So now, since the browser is telling that I need only JSON, this STD will be converted into JSON by the framework for you. So if I just complete this execution F8, see here, going back to the browser, it displays the output in the form of JSON. Okay, now let me debug that itself. And what I do here is, I will say like I will accept an XML, but right now I am sending a JSON. That is what I say. Okay, I'm sending a JSON and I will expect an XML. So now, okay, so make some changes here. ID double quotes. This is an int student name changed. Okay, so this I say send. Okay, now the request is sent to the server. The same old concept which I have explained in the previous scenario. What is the content type that I am sending? What is the type of content? The type of content is JSON. And what is that I am expecting back? I am expecting back an XML. So I am sending a JSON, and the JSON, if you see here, is converted into an object and is associated with this one and Raghu, and I'm making changes here, and when I return back an std object, again that is converted into an XML back for you by the framework. I just say f8. See here, the XML whatever I am sending is being sent or processed, and one and changed is what is being returned to me from the server in the form of an XML. So the conversions are taken care for you automatically. Okay, and sometimes maybe this is where sometimes people initially feel some difficulty in understanding this JSON, but JSON is pretty straightforward and simple. Like anything that you have, like this is a property followed by a colon and the value. So one I did not add in double quotes. Why? Because it is something called an int value that I'm sending. If it is a string, I place it in double quotes. Okay, so if you have a JSON and if you feel like whether the JSON syntax is correct or not, you can go to something called as a jsonlint.com, and this is one website where if you can place your paste your JSON and say validate, it will tell you, hey, if it is a valid JSON or not. If it is something like this, you say validate. Okay, so it shows like there is something an error after ID 1, and it is expecting something like comma stuff or something like that. So you can understand slowly. Why? Because this is what you get once you practice, but these are nothing but the properties that you give here and separated by commas. So just make sure that you can use this jsonlint.com for just validating. There might be different websites, this is one of them. Okay, for validating your JSON inputs and all. Okay, now in this next scenario, let me remove all the breakpoints. In the next scenario, what I do, or else let me explain one more concept here. So this concept holds good for even for the previous scenario also. What is the content type? I'm sending JSON. What is the accept? XML. So if you see the request headers, when I am sending a request from the browser is telling, hey server, understand that I can understand only XML. So accept is XML, and the content that I'm trying to send is application slash JSON, which means this is the specific header which is being sent from the browser onto the server, and the server says that, okay, since you are requesting me an XML, I am sending an XML. See, when the server is sending back the data, what is the data that server is sending? The server says that my content that I am sending from the server is XML. So from the server side, the content type is XML, which the browser is expecting in this scenario. The same thing, if I change back this to XML to JSON again, which means I'm sending a JSON and I'm expecting back a JSON. So I say send. See here, the accept is JSON and the content type is JSON, and the server is also telling that I'm sending you back a JSON, something like that. Okay, is this clear to everyone, like how to send JSON data and get the response in JSON or in XML or in any different format? Clear? Okay, okay, the next thing that I can say here is like one second. Okay, so the question here is like, how can you compare the difference between SOAP and REST and all these things? So the scenario here is something like, in general, if you say a SOAP is a protocol, okay, uh, which which can only deal with XML. Apart from XML, SOAP cannot deal with anything else. But if it is a REST, the basic thing in REST is like REST uses HTTP concepts directly, where it can have create, get, put, post, and delete, and it can support different types of formats of data. Like the most commonly used are XML and JSON. These are the two most commonly used, but SOAP supports only one format. That is the biggest difference between a SOAP and REST. And the other thing is like, whenever you say a SOAP internally has WS security classes, which means you might ask the question like, then why still SOAP is being used or stuff and all. SOAP has internal security classes, WS security classes, where those classes make SOAP very much reliable when you are trying to deal with some secure data transfer and all those things. In REST, still you can achieve the same thing in REST also, but still we need to use a third-party services for securing REST services and all. REST doesn't have its own way of implementation, and if we want to use some security, then we need to use, like, instead of using HTTP, we need to use HTTPS, which stands for hypertext transfer protocol, in a secure way. So it's like, when it comes to security, means sometimes it looks like the way XML is implemented in SOAP with security is much more stronger when compared to REST. But nowadays, like, there are many third-party tools and services which are coming for REST also, which makes it even more stronger and reliable, actually, as equivalent as SOAP services. Okay, so the very basic concept here is like, the more you understand about a REST service, like how you can create a REST service or how you can consume a REST service, it basically tells like, it tries to ease the way in which you try to consume and create the services actually. So it all basically deals with the URL patterns that you want to call, and if you have a URL pattern, you can always go ahead and make some requests onto the server and get back the data. Okay, so what I can say here is like, yeah, means there is lot, means, but basically before I go to the next step, any questions or any doubts till this point? Okay, that's fine. So maybe let me just stop the recording for the day.